You know that moment when nature itself holds its breath, when the world goes silent because something is about to happen that defies the very laws of survival, when two apex predators, each believing they are masters of their domain, collide in a way that rewrites everything we thought we knew about the African wilderness. This is that moment. This is the story of the Zambezi River in 1987, when 14 lions walked into a nightmare they couldn't escape, and 9 crocodiles discovered that even the kings of the land could bleed. But before we dive into what might be the most violent confrontation between two apex predators ever witnessed on the African continent, tell me, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your country in the comments below because I want to know where in the world people are discovering these untold stories of the wild. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell because what you're about to witness will shake everything you believe about predator hierarchy. This is not just a fight, this is a war written in blood and water. The Zambezi River. For thousands of years, it has been a lifeline. The arteries of Africa itself, carrying water through one of the harshest landscapes on the continent. But the Zambezi is not just a source of life. It is a border, a line drawn by nature itself between two kingdoms. On one side, the lions ruled. The vast savanna stretched endlessly, golden grass bending under the weight of their dominance. On the other side, in the murky depths, the crocodiles reigned supreme. These were not ordinary reptiles. These were giants, ancient creatures that had survived for 200 million years, outlasting dinosaurs, watching civilizations rise and crumble while they remained unchanged. Perfect predators, unchanged, undefeated. For decades, an uneasy truce had held between these two forces. Lions came to the river to drink, to cross, to hunt the herds that gathered at the water's edge. Crocodiles waited below, patient, silent, deadly. Both respected each other's dominion. Lions didn't venture into the water. Crocodiles didn't venture far onto the land. It was a balance forged in blood and reinforced by countless generations of understanding. Both knew the rules, both knew the cost of breaking them. But in 1987, something changed. Something primal, something that would shatter this ancient understanding forever. The year had been brutal. A drought unlike anything recorded in living memory had gripped the region. Rivers that usually flowed with abundance were reduced to skeletal channels. Lakes that had sustained life for centuries were drying up, their beds cracking into patterns that looked like the skin of some dying behemoth. The herds, desperate for water, had begun to congregate around the few remaining permanent sources. The Zambezi River became more than a lifeline. It became a death trap. Because when prey animals gather in desperation, predators gather in hunger. And when predators gather, violence follows. The pride of 14 lions had been tracking a massive herd of buffalo for 3 days. These were not ordinary buffalo. They were the strongest of their kind, the survivors of the drought, the ones with thick hides and horns that could split a lion's skull like an overripe melon. But they were thirsty, desperately, achingly thirsty, and at dusk, they had to come to the river. The pride, led by a massive male named Kiembe, a name meaning strength in the local language, had positioned themselves perfectly. They were hunters of extraordinary skill. Kiembe was 265 kilograms of muscle and scarred ferocity, his mane darkened by the blood of 1,000 hunts. The females in his pride were lean, fast, coordinated, moving like they shared a single mind. They had planned this hunt for days. They knew the buffalo would have to come. They knew they would be vulnerable. They had calculated every angle, every escape route, every possibility. What they didn't calculate was what waited beneath the water. The crocodiles had been gathering too, 9 of them, each a monument to predatory perfection. The largest was a female, 5.8 meters from snout to tail, weighing nearly 850 kilograms. She had been alive for 67 years, an eternity in the world of reptiles. She had outlived competitors, raised dozens of offspring, and carried scars from battles that would have killed lesser creatures. She was called Umkulu by the local people, a name meaning the Ancient One. Her eyes were ancient, her teeth were ancient, her hunger was eternal. These 9 crocodiles had claimed this section of the river for years, a territory encompassing 8 kilometers of the Zambezi. They had learned the patterns of migration, understood the seasonal flows of prey, and developed a hunting strategy that was nearly flawless. When animals came to drink, they died. It was simple. It was absolute. It was the only rule the river knew. But something else had changed in 1987. The crocodiles were not just hunting for survival anymore. They were hunting for territory. 2 years earlier, a massive male crocodile named Mbezi, nearly 6 meters long, had invaded their section of the river. Battles had ensued, brutal contests of crushing jaws and thrashing tails. In one particularly violent confrontation, Umkhulu had lost a section of her right rear leg. Mbezi had been driven downstream but not defeated, not killed, and he was gathering allies. 3 younger males had begun following him, watching, learning, waiting for the moment when they could challenge Umkhulu's dominance and claim the territory. And more importantly, the hunting grounds. Territorial pressure was building, not just between lions and crocodiles, but within the crocodile population itself. Umkhulu's control was being tested, her authority challenged. In this climate of internal conflict, when a new opportunity presented itself, she seized it with the ruthlessness that had made her legend. The first signs of what was coming appeared at 4:47 p.m., on a September afternoon when the sun hung low and the shadows stretched long across the savannah. The buffalo herd began to move toward the river. There were 340 of them, a massive congregation of horns and muscle and desperate thirst. Behind them, unseen, moving through the tall grass like phantoms, came the pride of lions. 14 powerful predators, coordinated, patient, ready to transform survival into slaughter. The lions had timed this perfectly. They would allow the buffalo to reach the river, would let them begin to drink, would wait for that moment of vulnerability when the herd's guard was lowest and the water obscured what lurked beneath. But they were not alone in their calculations. Umkhulu had risen from the depths at 4:52 p.m., her ancient eyes breaking the surface of the water. She had seen the buffalo coming. She had seen the dust cloud of the lions following, and she understood something that would drive the next 7 hours of violence. If the lions killed the buffalo here, at the river's edge, the water would be tainted with blood. The scent would drive away other prey for weeks. Her territory would become a wasteland. She had spent 67 years building dominance over this section of the river, teaching her offspring where and when to hunt, establishing patterns that ensured survival. She would not allow 14 lions to destroy that legacy. At 5:13 p.m., as the first buffalo reached the water's edge, Umkhulu made her move. It was not the cautious, patient approach that most crocodile hunts entailed. It was aggressive, it was territorial, it was an announcement that the river belonged to her, and any predator, no matter how powerful, no matter how many numbers they possessed, would have to face her wrath. She exploded from the water with a violence that shocked even the buffalo, creatures that had survived in this harsh landscape precisely because they understood danger. Her massive jaws clamped around the first buffalo to enter the water with 3,700 psi of pressure, a force so tremendous that bones shattered like glass. But she didn't pull the buffalo under immediately. Instead, she held it, thrashing, creating a maelstrom of water and blood that sent a signal screaming across the savannah. This is my river, this is my territory, and everything in it is mine. The buffalo herd erupted in panic. They wheeled back toward the land, a massive congregation of terrified muscle and bone attempting to flee from a threat unlike any they had faced. The water ran red, the banks shook, and somewhere in the tall grass the lions watched, confused, unprepared for what was unfolding. But they were still committed to the hunt. Kayembe, seeing the herd scatter, made his decision. He roared, a sound so powerful it silenced the chaos for a heartbeat, and the lions charged. What happened next would be remembered by the wildlife researchers who documented it from a distance as the most catastrophic collision between apex predators ever recorded. Because now, for the first time, the lions and crocodiles were not respecting the ancient borders. They were colliding, and the river would become a graveyard. The charge of the lions was unlike anything the crocodiles had expected. Not the cautious approach of animals testing boundaries, but a full assault. Kayembe led the charge, his massive frame devouring the ground between the tall grass and the river's edge in desperate lunges. Behind him, the lionesses spread in a coordinated formation, their muscles rippling under golden coats, their eyes locked on prey that was scattering in all directions. They had committed. There was no turning back now. The hunt that they had planned so meticulously was collapsing into chaos. But they would salvage what they could from the wreckage. The buffalo nearest the water's edge made the critical mistake that would change everything. Instead of fleeing inland, fully into the savannah where the lions held dominance, a young bull panicked and attempted to cross the river entirely. It was a decision born of pure terror. the kind of split-second choice that in nature often determines who lives and who dies. The bull plunged into the water, its massive body creating waves that rippled across the surface. For a moment it seemed like it might actually make it. Its powerful legs propelled it forward, its horns cutting through the murky current, its desperation lending it strength that might not have been enough against ordinary obstacles. But the Zambezi was not an ordinary obstacle. Umkulu was waiting. The ancient crocodile rose beneath the buffalo with a violence that defied the conventional image of crocodile hunting. Instead of the patient stalk, the silent approach, the sudden ambush from the depths, Umkulu attacked with the fury of a creature defending her territory. Her jaws opened to a 90-degree angle, revealing teeth that had been honed by 67 years of predation, each one a weapon designed by evolution itself to pierce, to tear, to hold. She caught the buffalo mid-body, not at the neck where a quick kill would be assured, but along the flank. Her teeth sank deep, puncturing the thick hide as if it were paper. The buffalo screamed, a sound that no living thing should have to endure, a shriek of agony and terror that echoed across the water and froze the lions in their tracks for just a moment. Just a moment was all that was needed to shift the entire trajectory of what was about to unfold. The buffalo thrashed with the strength of a dying god. Its horns slashed at the water, creating spray that caught the late afternoon light and turned it red. Its back legs churned, attempting to find purchase on the river bottom, attempting to free itself from a grip that was designed across millions of years of evolution, specifically to hold and to kill. But Umkulu was not alone. The other 8 crocodiles, sensing the opening, sensing the blood in the water, sensing the territorial assertion of their matriarch, exploded into motion. One massive male, nearly 5 meters long, with a scarred snout and a missing right eye from some ancient battle, crashed into the buffalo from the opposite side. His jaws closed around the animal's rear leg, and when he pulled with the force of something that had never known failure. The bull's leg bent at an angle that nature had never intended. Bone snapped, tendons tore, blood poured into the water, transforming it from murky brown to a deep, terrible crimson. The lions watched this unfold with growing realization that the hunt they had planned was dissolving before their eyes. But Kayembe did not hesitate. He had not survived to his current position of dominance by backing away from conflict. He had earned his massive frame, his powerful mane, his absolute authority over the pride through violence and victory. He waded into the river. The water came up to his chest as he advanced. His eyes locked on the thrashing buffalo that was now dying beneath the weight of crocodile predation. Behind him, 2 of his strongest lionesses followed. They moved with less certainty than their leader, their bodies tense, reading the danger in every ripple of the water. This was not their hunting ground. This was the crocodile's domain. But hunger had driven them here, and pride, that dangerous, consuming pride, would not allow them to retreat without attempting to claim what they had been stalking for 3 days. The first crocodile to notice the approaching lions was a younger male, perhaps 4.2 meters long, with scars still pink from recent territorial battles. He abandoned his position on the dying buffalo and turned toward Kayembe with an aggression that seemed almost personal. The lion was in the water now, the great equalizer. On land, Kayembe was supreme. He was a 265-kilogram force of muscle and claws and teeth. But in the water, even his dominance was reduced. The crocodile's environment negated some of the advantages that had made the lion king of the savannah. The young crocodile launched itself at Kayembe with a speed that would have been terrifying if the lion had not possessed the reflexes of a creature that had survived countless battles. Kayembe twisted, and the crocodile's jaws snapped at the space where his body had been a millisecond before. The lion's response was immediate and vicious. His right paw, equipped with claws that could pierce thick hide, raked across the crocodile's snout with enough force to draw blood. The reptile shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and attempted to reposition itself for another attack. But Kayembe did not give him the chance. The lion, now fully committed to the water battle, grabbed the crocodile's tail and twisted with all the power in his massive frame. The crocodile rolled, a natural defensive response. But instead of dislodging the lion, it only entangled them further. For several terrible seconds, they thrashed together in the water, a tangle of fur and scale, of mammalian muscle and reptilian armor, each trying to find the angle that would spell death for the other. The lionesses, watching their leader struggle, made the decision that would cost them dearly. They surged forward to support him. One of them, a female named Amara, younger and faster than the others, moved to attack the crocodile that had claimed the buffalo. But as she waded deeper, a massive form rose from the water directly in her path. It was Umkulu herself. The ancient matriarch was 5.8 meters of pure predatory intent. Her scarred body spoke of decades of survival, of battles won, of prey conquered. She moved with a slowness that belied her strength, her aged body still capable of speeds that could shatter bone. Amara saw her rising from the depths and made the split-second decision to retreat, but it was too late. Umkulu's tail, thick as a tree trunk and powered by muscles that had been refined across 7 decades, swept across the water. It caught Amara mid-body and sent her flying backward. Her 160-kilogram frame lifted bodily out of the water as if she weighed nothing at all. The lioness crashed back into the river with a force that momentarily stunned her. When she surfaced, gasping, she found herself separated from her pride by 15 meters of churning water. Behind her, Umkulu was advancing with the inexorable slowness of something that knew it held absolute dominance. Amara turned and began swimming frantically toward the shore, her powerful strokes carrying her through the water with desperation that gave her speed. But crocodiles are built for water in a way that no land mammal can match. Umkulu was closing the distance with ease, her tail propelling her forward in a way that seemed almost lazy, as if she knew the outcome was already determined. Back in the center of the conflict, Kayembe had finally managed to flip the younger crocodile onto its back, exposing the vulnerable belly. For most animals, this would mean death. A lion with access to an inverted crocodile could tear open the underbelly in seconds. But this crocodile, even in this desperate position, was not finished. Its tail whipped around with a violence that caught Kayembe across the face, opening gashes that immediately began bleeding into the water. The lion roared, a sound of pain and fury mixed together, and released his grip. Both predators separated, creating distance, both breathing heavily, both understanding that they had met an equal in combat. What happened next would be documented by the wildlife researchers watching from the riverbank as the moment when the conflict truly escalated into full-scale war. The remaining lionesses, seeing their leader wounded and surrounded, made a coordinated decision. They would attack the crocodiles as a unit, would bring the weight of their numbers and their coordination to bear against individual crocodiles. It was a strategy born of desperation, of pride, of the refusal to accept defeat. 3 lionesses surged into the water simultaneously, their movements synchronized like dancers who had practiced their choreography 1,000 times. Their target was the large, scarred male, who had been the first to join Umkulu in the attack on the buffalo. This crocodile, perhaps 4.8 meters long and weighing over 650 kilograms, turned to face the assault. What followed was a ballet of violence, a 3-on-1 battle that would determine not just the fate of the individual animals, but would ripple outward to reshape how lions and crocodiles would interact on the Zambezi for years to come. The lead lioness struck first, her claws raking across the crocodile's left eye. The reptile's response was immediate, a snap of its massive jaws that missed its target, but came close enough that the lioness could feel the pressure of the air being displaced. The crocodile's tail swept around, attempting to create space, attempting to even the odds by separating the lionesses and dealing with them individually. But these were not ordinary lions. These were pride hunters, creatures whose very evolution had been shaped by cooperation and coordination. The second lioness came from the side while the first was retracting from her initial attack. Her jaws found purchase on the crocodile's rear leg, just above the ankle joint. She clamped down with enough force to make the crocodile shriek and thrash. The third lioness, seeing the opening, went for the tail, attempting to drag the crocodile toward shallower water, where the lions would have an advantage. For 30 seconds, the outcome hung in balance. The crocodile was powerful, was armored, was built for exactly this kind of struggle. But the lionesses were fast, were coordinated, were fighting with the desperation of creatures that had committed to a path and would see it through regardless of the cost. Then, slowly, inexorably, the tide began to shift. The crocodile, bleeding from multiple wounds, began to weaken. Its movements became less controlled, more panicked. The lionesses sensed the advantage and pressed harder, driving the reptile backward, driving it toward the shore where their full strength and their pack advantage would be overwhelming. It was at this moment that Umkulu returned from chasing Amara. The ancient matriarch had successfully cornered the fleeing lioness and had been about to deliver a killing bite when she realized that one of her own was being overwhelmed. Without hesitation, without calculation, driven by the same territorial imperative that had driven her to attack the buffalo, Umkulu rushed to her clan members' aid. The water erupted into chaos. 9 crocodiles, now fully engaged, now understanding that this was not a hunt for food, but a war for dominance and territory, coordinated their assault with a sophistication that belied their reptilian nature. The lions, numbering 14, found themselves fighting not just against individual crocodiles, but against a coordinated force that seemed to operate as a single organism. By 6:47 p.m., as the sun touched the horizon and painted the river in shades of crimson and gold, the true scope of the battle became apparent. The Zambezi was literally running red. Carcasses of fish that had been killed in the chaos floated on the surface. The buffalo that had started the entire confrontation was long dead, its body torn into pieces that scattered across the riverbed, and the water itself seemed to vibrate with the violence being perpetrated within it. This was no longer a hunt. This was war in its purest, most terrible form, and the night was just beginning. Darkness fell on the Zambezi River like a death sentence. The sun, which had witnessed the first hours of the conflict, retreated below the horizon, leaving behind only the pale glow of a rising moon and the terrible sounds of predators locked in combat. For the lions, darkness was supposed to be their greatest ally. They were creatures of the night, their eyes adapted to see in near total black, their hunting patterns refined through millions of years of nocturnal predation. But tonight, the darkness was everyone's enemy. In the black water, the crocodiles moved like ghosts, like something between flesh and shadow. The lions could not see clearly enough to strike with precision. The crocodiles, operating on senses far more sophisticated than mere sight, pressure sensors lining their entire bodies, electromagnetic receptors in their snouts, lateral line systems that detected vibrations invisible to mammalian perception, moved with absolute certainty through the murk. By 7:30 p.m., approximately 2 hours and 17 minutes after the first buffalo had entered the water, the battle had fundamentally transformed. What had begun as a conflict over a kill, a territorial assertion, a moment of predatory collision, had evolved into something far more primal and far more devastating. The lions were no longer attempting to hunt, they were attempting to survive. The crocodiles were no longer defending territory, they were executing a war of extermination. Kayembe, the massive male lion who had led the charge into the river, was now fighting a battle on 2 fronts. To his left, the young, scarred crocodile that he had tangled with earlier had returned for another assault, this time with even greater aggression. But more terrifyingly, to his right, moving through the water with the inexorable determination of an ancient predator, was Umkulu herself. The old matriarch had decided that the lion leader represented the greatest threat to her dominance, and she had set her considerable intellect toward his destruction. Kayembe's body was failing him in ways that no lion should have to experience. A deep gash across his left side, delivered by a crocodile's tail strike, bled continuously. His right front leg, caught and twisted by a crocodile that he had thought he had defeated, throbbed with pain that made every movement an exercise in suffering. His mane, once a pristine symbol of dominance, was matted with blood, torn in places, hanging in tattered strips, but his eyes still burned with defiance. His roar, though weakening, still carried the authority of a king unwilling to accept his throne being taken. At 8:02 p.m., Kayembe made a decision that would define the rest of the night. Recognizing that the river was no longer a place where lion tactics could prevail, recognizing that the water was the crocodile's ultimate advantage, he began to move toward the shore. It was not a retreat, he would never call it that, and neither would the pride. It was a tactical repositioning, a strategic withdrawal into terrain where the lions could bring their full strength to bear. But the crocodiles, understanding the critical nature of the moment, did not allow him to leave unmolested. Umkulu, with a speed that belied her 850-kilogram bulk, cut off his path to the shallows. The ancient matriarch's jaws opened, revealing a throat that seemed to go down forever, teeth arranged in rows that had been used to crack turtle shells and splinter the bones of hippopotami. Kayembe twisted with a desperation born of pure survival instinct, and Umkulu's teeth closed on empty water, the force of her bite creating a pressure wave that knocked the lion sideways. But this moment, this split second of Umkulu's commitment to the attack, was all that Kayembe needed. The lion's massive right paw, claws extended, raked across Umkulu's face. They found her left eye, the one she had been protecting, the one that had been vulnerable since Amara had struck it earlier. But Amara's claws had only wounded it. Kayembe's did more, much more. The impact of his paw against the eye socket was such that the bone cracked. The eye itself, damaged beyond repair, ruptured. Blood and fluid poured into the water, creating a cloud that would render that part of her vision useless forever. Umkulu screamed, a sound like tearing metal mixed with the roar of an ancient engine. She thrashed away from the lion, her massive body convulsing with pain and shock. It was the first real victory for the lions in the conflict. Not a decisive victory, not a triumph, but a moment where Fang and Claw had proven that even the ancient crocodiles could bleed, could hurt, could be wounded in ways that mattered. The other lions, witnessing this moment, seemed to gather a renewed strength. The lionesses who had been fighting their individual battles with crocodiles suddenly fought with greater coordination, greater ferocity, greater belief that victory might still be possible. But Umkulu's injury changed something fundamental in the dynamics of the battle. The ancient matriarch, now partially blinded, now in pain beyond anything she had experienced in decades, did something that would reshape the entire conflict. She called, a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the water and across the land. It was a sound of dominance, but also something else, something darker, a call to arms, a summons to her offspring, who were scattered throughout the region. Within minutes, the water near the primary battle zone began to churn with movement. 3 younger crocodiles, drawn by the call of their matriarch, emerged from tributary channels and joined the conflict. They were not massive like Umkulu or even the large scarred male, but they were fresh, they were fast, and they were driven by the genetic imperative to answer their mother's cry. The odds, which had seemed to be shifting in favor of the lions, shifted again. 13 crocodiles against 14 lions. But now the crocodiles had momentum, had numbers that matched the lions, and possessed the advantage of terrain. At 8:45 p.m., the first lion death occurred. One of the younger lionesses, barely 5 years old, named Tamba, made a critical error in judgment. Attempting to drive a crocodile backward, she overextended herself in the shallows, her rear legs vulnerable. 2 crocodiles, moving with orchestrated precision, attacked from opposite sides. Their jaws clamped around her rear legs, and they pulled. The lioness screamed, a sound of agony and terror that froze the entire battlefield for a moment. Her sisters responded immediately, rushing to her aid, but it was too late. The crocodiles pulled with a combined force that no animal should have to endure. Bones snapped, tendons tore, flesh separated. Tamba's body was literally torn apart, her lifespan ending not in glorious battle, but in the brutal mathematics of predator versus predator, where the rules of nature allowed no mercy, no compassion, no second chances. The impact on the pride was immediate and profound. The lions, who had been fighting with the confidence of the apex predators, were suddenly confronted with their own mortality, in a battle where one of their own had just been killed, in a place where they were no longer supreme. The psychological weight of the situation began to settle upon them like a physical force. Their attacks became less coordinated, their movements showed more hesitation. The unity that had been their greatest strength was beginning to fracture under the weight of loss and the terror of facing an enemy that could not be defeated through the normal tactics of predator dominance. Kayembe, though wounded and weakening, refused to accept defeat. He had lost a daughter, not just any member of his pride, but a lioness who carried his blood, who would have carried his legacy, who represented the future of his dominance. The pain of this loss mixed with his physical wounds to create something new in the massive male, a rage so pure, so consuming, that it seemed to burn away his injuries. At 9:13 p.m., Kayembe made a decision that would become legend in the region, a decision that would be retold in hushed tones for generations. He charged directly at Umkulu. The blinded matriarch, still powerful despite her wound, detected his approach through the pressure sensors along her body. She turned to meet him, her jaws opening, her remaining eyes searching for a target. But Kayembe did not engage her in the water. Instead, in a move that demonstrated extraordinary tactical awareness, he drove her toward the shore, using his remaining strength to push, to drive, to force the ancient crocodile into shallower and shallower water, where her aquatic advantages would matter less and less. Umkulu fought with the desperation of a creature that had ruled her domain for 70 years and would not relinquish that rule. Her tail struck with the force of a club, and when it connected with Kiyembe's body, the impact drove the air from his lungs. Her teeth snapped at the space around him, hungry, desperate, seeking the fatal bite that would end this presumptuous mammal's challenge. But Kiyembe pressed forward, bleeding, wounded, driven by something beyond the normal calculus of predatory behavior. He was driven by love, by loss, by the refusal to accept defeat in front of his pride. At 9:47 p.m., Umkulu's rear legs found no purchase in the shallow water. She was beginning to be pushed onto the muddy bank, into terrain where her greatest advantages would be completely negated. In desperation, she did what no wild crocodile should do. She turned and fled, not back into the deeper water where she belonged, but upward, onto the muddy banks of the Zambezi, attempting to reach higher ground where she might rest and regroup. Kiyembe did not let her retreat unmolested. The massive lion pursued, every step a testimony to shattered pain and absolute will. When Umkulu reached the bank and began to drag herself upward, her blinded eye making her movements uncertain and confused, Kiyembe was there. The lion's jaws closed around the ancient matriarch's throat, not with the crushing force of a predator attempting a kill. Kiyembe did not have that strength remaining, but with the determined grip of something unwilling to release. They fell together, lion and crocodile, onto the bank, a tangle of fur and scale, each attempting to assert dominance over the other through sheer force of will. The other lions, witnessing their leader's assault, seemed to find renewed purpose. Those engaged with younger crocodiles pressed their attacks with greater ferocity. The water ran deeper red, the bank became slick with blood, and slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, but then with increasing clarity, the tide of battle began to shift once more. One of the larger male lions, a battle-scarred creature named Jabari, with only one ear and the other torn to shreds from ancient battles, managed to corner a younger crocodile in the shallows. With the reptile unable to retreat to deeper water due to the presence of other lions, unable to attack with full effectiveness in the shallow water where the lion's claws held all the advantages, Jabari delivered a series of strikes that were devastating in their precision and their power. The crocodile's armored skin, designed to withstand impacts that would splinter normal flesh, was no match for claws driven by the strength of a 220-kilogram male lion fighting for his pride's survival. By 10:30 p.m., the battle had reached a crisis point. 3 crocodiles lay dead, 2 of them killed by coordinated lioness attacks, one having died from the infection spreading through wounds delivered by Jabari. Several others were wounded so severely that they had retreated to the deeper water, seeking sanctuary in the depths. The lions, too, had paid a terrible price. Besides Tamba, another lioness had been severely wounded, her back leg hanging useless, her life now dependent on whether the pride could protect her through the night and beyond. And Kiyembe and Umkulu remained locked in their struggle on the riverbank, an epic confrontation between an old king defending her kingdom and a new king asserting his dominance, between a creature who had ruled 70 years and a creature whose rule might end here and now. Their battle, illuminated by moonlight, was watched silently by the remaining predators, because both lions and crocodiles seemed to understand that this single combat, this duel between titans, would determine the outcome of the larger war. Kiyembe, bleeding from dozens of wounds, his body shattered with exhaustion and pain, found himself looking into the face of Umkulu. The ancient matriarch's one remaining eye held centuries of survival, of wisdom earned through countless battles, of a will to dominance that would not easily break. For a moment, neither moved. For a moment, 2 apex predators simply stared at each other, recognizing in the other a kindred spirit, a creature equally committed to survival, equally unwilling to accept defeat, equally driven by the ancient imperatives that had kept their species alive while civilizations rose and fell around them. And then, as the night deepened and the river ran crimson, the final phase of the battle began. The final confrontation between Kiyembe and Umkulu played out like the ending of an ancient myth, like something that existed beyond the normal rules of nature, beyond the understanding of creatures that had not lived for 7 decades in a world that demanded absolute dominance or absolute death. On the muddy bank of the Zambezi, illuminated by a moon that seemed to hang lower than it should, the old matriarch crocodile and the great male lion faced each other with the weight of their entire existence bearing down upon them like a physical force. Umkulu, blinded on her left side, weakened by decades of scars and countless battles, possessed something that age and experience had honed to lethal perfection, the knowledge of exactly how to kill. She had survived 70 years not through luck, not through the favor of fortune, but through an understanding of combat that went beyond instinct. It was something almost like wisdom, a predatory calculus refined through countless confrontations. Her tail, thick as a tree trunk and weighted with the power of her ancient body, became her primary weapon. She couldn't see the lion clearly enough to strike with her jaws with confidence. But the tail was guided by pressure sensors and instinct that did not require vision. Kayembe, bleeding from wounds that should have been fatal, breathing in ragged gasps that spoke of internal injuries and absolute exhaustion, possessed something that Umkulu had lost. Physical strength that had not yet been worn away by time. His muscles, though shattered and screaming with pain, still held the explosive power of his prime. His claws, though dulled from striking scales and stone, could still rend flesh. His jaws, though weakened, could still crush bone. But more than anything, he possessed something that transcended the physical. He possessed fury. He possessed purpose. He possessed the need to avenge his daughter. The confrontation began at 10:47 p.m. with Umkulu's tail striking like a whip made of stone. The impact caught Kayembe across the face, and he felt something crack behind his right eye. Stars exploded in his vision, and for a moment the world tilted at an impossible angle. But the pain, instead of breaking him, seemed to crystallize his focus. He moved into the space where the tail had been, moving faster than a creature with his injuries should have been able to move, and his jaws closed around the thick muscular column of the crocodile's tail. For several seconds they remained locked in this configuration, the lion holding the tail, the crocodile unable to pull free, both creatures understanding that the next few moments would determine the outcome of their individual war. Umkulu thrashed with a violence that seemed to come from the earth itself, her ancient body drawing on reserves of strength that should have been depleted long ago. The mud around them churned into a soupy mixture of earth and blood. The lion's feet dug into the ground, seeking purchase, seeking stability from which to exert leverage against a creature designed across millions of years of evolution, specifically to resist such attacks. Then Kayembe did something that demonstrated not just strength, but tactical genius. Instead of attempting to maintain his grip, instead of engaging in a test of wills that he might lose, he released the tail and rolled to his left, moving inside Umkulu's reach. The crocodile, her momentum already committed to a thrash, found her tail sweeping through empty space. For a fraction of a second, barely measurable in time, she was vulnerable. Her underbelly, the soft skin that had been protected throughout her entire 70-year life, was exposed. Kayembe's claws found that vulnerable flesh and raked downward with all the remaining strength in his body. The impact was devastating. Deep gashes opened along the crocodile's underside, revealing muscle and organ, releasing blood in quantities that turned the mud beneath them a deeper red than anything that had stained it that night. Umkulu screamed, a sound so primal, so ancient, that it seemed to come from the earth itself rather than from the throat of a living creature. She rolled, attempting the defensive maneuver that had saved her countless times before, attempting to use her armor-like body to protect her vulnerable underside. But Kayembe did not allow her to complete the roll. The massive male lion placed his entire body weight on her exposed side, pinning her, preventing the roll, keeping her vulnerable. This was no longer a test of predatory skill or adaptive warfare. This was pure, brutal dominance. This was the law of nature in its most fundamental form. The stronger would survive, and the weaker would cease to exist. Kayembe's jaws descended toward Umkulu's throat, the one place on a crocodile's body where lethality could be assured. The ancient matriarch, recognizing the inevitability of what was about to happen, did something that wildlife behaviorists would later describe as the most profound moment of her entire existence. She stopped fighting, not in death. She was not dead yet, but she stopped struggling. She stopped thrashing. She stopped resisting. She lay upon the mud, her one remaining eye fixed on the lion above her, and she accepted what was about to occur, with the kind of resignation that suggested wisdom so deep it might have transcended the boundary between instinct and consciousness. In that moment something passed between them, an acknowledgement between two titans that their battle was over, that the natural order of things demanded a victor and a vanquished, and that the universe had spoken its judgment. Kayembe's jaws closed around Umkulu's throat at 11:03 p.m. The pressure was not as violent as a killing bite, delivered by a creature at full strength, but it was sufficient. It was absolute, and after 70 years of dominance, after 7 decades of absolute rule over the Zambezi River, After ruling with a power that had seemed eternal and unchanging, Umkhulu of the Zambezi drew her last breath. The old matriarch Crocodile, the legend of the river, the ancient one who had outlasted 200 lion generations and survived threats that would have destroyed lesser creatures, became still. Her body, that magnificent 5.8-meter machine of predatory perfection, relaxed into the mud. Her remaining eye, which had witnessed countless seasons, countless kills, countless territorial wars, closed for the final time. She was gone. On the river, in the deeper water where Umkhulu's offspring and the remaining crocodiles had been watching the confrontation through senses that transcended human comprehension, something shifted. It was as if the water itself had changed. The remaining crocodiles, 8 of them still alive, suddenly ceased their attacks. The coordinated aggression that had defined their assault on the lions evaporated in an instant. They began to retreat, to move toward deeper water, to remove themselves from a battlefield that no longer belonged to them. The lions, witnessing this moment, seemed to understand its significance. The ones still engaged with crocodiles pressed their attacks with renewed ferocity, not with mercy but with the knowledge that victory was now within their grasp. One by one, the remaining crocodiles were driven back into the water. Some would die in the shallows, overwhelmed by coordinated lion attacks. Others would escape to the deeper water, carrying wounds that would mark them for the rest of their lives, reminders of the night when the ancient balance had been shattered. By 11:47 p.m., approximately 7 hours and 34 minutes after the first buffalo had entered the water, the battle effectively ended. The lions still held the riverbank. The surviving crocodiles had retreated to the deeper water. The water itself had become so saturated with blood that it appeared almost black in the moonlight, a physical representation of the violence that had been perpetrated within it. Kayembe stood over Umkhulu's body, breathing in ragged gasps, every breath a journey through pain that transcended the physical. His body was a catalogue of injuries. The gash along his left side had stopped bleeding, which was not a good sign. It meant the wound had closed off, trapping blood inside, potentially leading to infection and death. In the slow hours that would follow, his right front leg, damaged earlier in the battle, could barely support his weight. His face was swollen beyond recognition. One ear was completely torn away. His mane, which had once been the symbol of his absolute dominance, hung in tatters. But he was alive, and more importantly, he was victor. The lionesses, those who had survived the battle, began to gather around their leader. Some were wounded, severely wounded. One could no longer walk properly. Another had lost a portion of her ear, but they were alive. Out of 14 lions that had entered the river at sunset, 12 remained as dawn began to break. 2 had been killed. Tamba and a younger male named Simba, who had been dragged into deep water and drowned by a coalition of crocodiles working in terrifying synchronization. The losses for the crocodiles were different. Of the initial 9, and the 3 that had answered Umkhulu's call, one thing was certain: Umkhulu was dead, and at least 3 others had been killed in direct combat with the lions. Several others bore wounds so severe that survival seemed unlikely. The great matriarch of the Zambezi River, the creature that had ruled for 70 years, that had seemed eternal and unchanging, was gone. As the first light of dawn broke over the Zambezi River on September 19, 1987, the landscape bore the physical testimony of what had transpired. The bank was littered with debris, torn vegetation, broken branches, massive amounts of blood that had begun to dry in the early morning heat. Floating in the water were pieces of the buffalo that had started it all, now barely recognizable as having ever been a living thing. Scattered throughout the river were the bodies of smaller animals, fish that had been killed in the chaos, birds that had gotten caught in the violence, creatures whose only crime had been existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The lions did not celebrate. There was no victory dance, no triumphant roaring, no display of dominance over a defeated enemy. Instead, they lay in the mud, exhausted beyond measure, wounded beyond counting, existing in that peculiar state between death and life, where survival had been achieved but at a cost so tremendous that it was unclear whether survival was truly victory or merely a postponement of inevitable destruction. Kayembe lay beside Umkhulu's body as the sun rose higher. The massive male lion and the ancient crocodile, 2 apex predators who had collided at the intersection of their territories, now lay at peace together on the muddy bank of the Zambezi. The lion's breathing was shallow, labored, the sound of something that had been broken by forces beyond its capacity to endure. But he was breathing, and as long as he breathed, he was still king, the pride's king, the victor of this impossible battle. By mid-morning on September 19th, the pride had begun to move away from the river. They did not hunt. They did not attempt to claim the buffalo's remains. They simply moved inland, seeking rest, seeking shade, seeking the time their bodies would need to heal from wounds, both physical and psychological. Behind them, they left a landscape forever changed. The watering hole that had been their target that previous afternoon was no longer a place of gentle drinking. It had become a place of legend, a place where water ran red with the blood of titans. The remaining crocodiles, observing from the deeper water, did not immediately reclaim their territory. For weeks afterward, they avoided the primary battleground, avoiding the place where Umkulu had fallen, avoiding the spot where their matriarch's body had lain until scavengers had claimed it. The balance that had existed for decades between lions and crocodiles on the Zambezi had been fundamentally altered. The lions had proven that even the apex predator of the water could be defeated. The crocodiles had learned that numbers and armor were not absolute guarantees against a force driven by sufficient rage and sufficient will. In the weeks and months that followed, wildlife researchers who documented the area noted something unprecedented. The lions began to demonstrate new behaviors. They would approach the water's edge with caution, with respect, with an understanding that this was not simply territory to be claimed, but a place where death existed in forms that transcended the normal patterns of predation. The crocodiles, too, demonstrated behavioral changes. They became more aggressive toward each other, as if Umkulu's death had triggered a succession crisis that needed to be resolved through dominance displays and territorial warfare. The battle between 14 lions and 9 crocodiles on the Zambezi River became a legend whispered by guides to travelers, discussed in hushed tones around campfires, retold in the oral traditions of local peoples. Some embellished the story, claiming that the water had run red for days afterward. Others spoke of it as a curse, a moment when the natural balance had been shattered and the spirits of the fallen still lingered in the river's depths. But the truth, the actual documented truth, was perhaps even more profound than the legends, for on that night in 1987, the ancient understanding between lions and crocodiles had been broken. The border that separated their domains had been violated, and both species, forever changed by the encounter, had been forced to acknowledge that in nature there are moments when the rules shift, when the expected hierarchies are overturned, when survival demands not just strength, but the kind of desperate will that transcends the normal patterns of predatory behavior. Kayembe, though he recovered from his wounds, was never quite the same. He lived for another 6 years, ruling his pride with an authority that had been forged in the crucible of that terrible battle. But guides who observed him in the years that followed reported that he never again approached the Zambezi River. Whether this represented respect, fear, or simply the wisdom of a creature that had learned that some victories came at too high a cost, no one could say. As for the crocodiles, a new matriarch eventually rose to power, a younger female who had survived the battle and carried the genetic memory of that night in her DNA, in her instincts, in her very understanding of how to survive in a world where even the ancient rules could be broken. The Zambezi River returned to relative calm. The buffalo herds resumed their migrations. The lions and crocodiles redefined their territorial boundaries, but something had changed. Some essential understanding had been violated, and in the hearts of both species, there remained a memory of the night when 14 lions and 9 crocodiles collided in a battle that would be remembered, in whispers and in silence, for generations to come. The water eventually ran clear again. The blood was washed away by the current. The bodies of the fallen were consumed by scavengers. Nature, with its remorseless efficiency, moved on. But for those who had witnessed it, for those who knew the truth of what had transpired on that September night in 1987, the Battle of the Zambezi River remained etched forever. A reminder that even in a world governed by ancient laws and eternal hierarchies, there are moments when everything changes. Moments when titans collide. Moments when the earth itself trembles with the violence of predators pushed beyond their limits, driven by imperatives that transcend understanding, locked in a struggle that will reverberate through time and memory, long after the last of them has drawn their final breath. The river remembers, the land remembers, and in the whispers of guides and the dreams of travelers, the legend endures. The battle of 14 lions versus 9 crocodiles, when the Zambezi became a graveyard, and titans learned that dominance, no matter how absolute, is never truly secure against the will of another creature, equally committed to survival. This is the story of the river. This is the story of the night when the rules were broken. And this is a story that will echo through Africa's wilderness forever.